Hello everyone, Ruslan Belov here, and this is the daily analysis of the Ukrainian front. Before we begin, as always, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. As you know, your subscription helps the channel grow enormously. Thanks to everyone who has subscribed. Last night in Kyiv was extremely intense. The Russian army carried out a massed strike on the Ukrainian capital using around 30 ballistic missiles, with the strike package also including missiles from S-400 systems and Zircons. The main targets were warehouse facilities. Warehouses belonging to the largest logistics companies were destroyed, along with a warehouse belonging to a major online retailer and warehouses at shopping centers. An enormous amount of footage of burning warehouses has emerged. Residents of the capital reported that the entire city was covered in smoke, and everyone was advised to keep their windows closed. Overall, the strikes on warehouses have come back around to Ukraine, and I suspect that before long there won't be many large warehouses left standing anywhere in the country. In other words, the war has moved into a phase where strikes are no longer only military. They're now hitting civilian infrastructure that has little or no connection to the military effort. The damage from such strikes will likely run into several $1 billion for both Russia and Ukraine, since beyond the warehouses themselves, the goods stored inside were destroyed too, effectively wiping out entire businesses that will no longer generate revenue. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs across both countries. As far as I know, more than 1 million people in Russia work with this particular online retailer. It's essentially Russia's answer to Amazon. Kyiv facing a possible environmental crisis. Bortnitska aeration station reportedly hit the head of the Ukrainian analytical center. IDOS Viktor Taran stated that the objective may not be to physically destroy the station's concrete structures, but rather to knock out its power supply. A prolonged power outage could disable the biological treatment system and make restoring the facility's operation significantly more difficult. At the same time, General Staff of the AFU spokesman Likovyi has just denied the claim that the station was hit. The Bortnitska station is a key facility in Kyiv's sewage infrastructure, serving the capital and surrounding districts. A prolonged shutdown could create problems with wastewater drainage and treatment. Analysts also warn of possible environmental and sanitary consequences, including untreated sewage entering the Dnipro River and an increased risk of intestinal infections spreading. It should be noted that these assessments reflect Taran's position specifically. The actual scale of any consequences and the real condition of the station remain undetailed for now. Zelensky also spoke publicly and went back to asking the US for Patriot missiles, stating that the number of air defense interceptors available has dropped threefold, with deliveries falling sharply compared to 2025. His advisor also claimed that Russia may be capable of striking up to 100 targets a month across Ukraine, which, at a rate of 2 interceptors per incoming missile, would mean burning through 200 interceptors a month. That's a colossal number, given that annual US production is under 1,000 units. Following his meeting with Zelensky, Trump reportedly declined to supply anything further, as far as I understand, even for payment. There are no other systems besides Patriots capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, meaning all of Ukraine will remain exposed to Russian ballistic strikes for many months to come. Russia's advantage in missiles is now very significant, and it will be interesting to watch whether the Russian side chooses to escalate further in this war. If it doesn't, Ukraine will likely start using its own ballistic missiles against Russia before long. Though their numbers are small for now, and Russian air defense would intercept a portion of them regardless, over time there's a chance Ukraine builds up a comparable arsenal. Europeans are also working on an accelerated basis to develop their own Patriot equivalent, but as I understand it, that's still at least a year away. The technical challenges are considerable, and it isn't cheap either. Overall, in the coming months, Russia has a good window of opportunity to raise the stakes in this war using ballistic missiles. For instance, striking the bridges across the Dnipro River could create major problems for the entire Ukrainian economy. Drone with explosives found near Ukrainian An-124 in Germany. Another cargo plane collides with unknown object. A drone carrying explosives was discovered near a Ukrainian An-124 Antonov transport aircraft in Leipzig. The airport temporarily suspended operations as a result, and police are treating sabotage as one possible explanation. During the closure, another cargo aircraft, located about 6 kilometers from the airfield, collided in the air with an unidentified object and sustained damage to its nose section. The incident is being investigated as a possible offense against state security. Let's start, as usual, with the north, where AFU defenses continue to deteriorate. Yesterday, I told you that Backfires had been brought under full control and that fighting was gradually shifting further south. Combined with the earlier capture of neighboring Vilkivka and, of course, Bili Kolodiaz, this gives Russian forces a solid base for a further push. Where to next? As we discussed yesterday, toward Prikholotny. At the moment, Russian troops are just under 9 kilometers from the settlement. The width of the Vovchansk bridgehead alone is around 40 kilometers, with a depth already exceeding 20 kilometers, meaning Russian forces have advanced quite considerably into Ukrainian territory in this area. Given the current pace maintained by the North grouping, Prikholotny can be considered not all that far off. Of course, the priority here is closing the pocket between Backfires and Ivanivka, and finishing off Ivanivka itself to secure the position more firmly, something I'm confident will happen soon, since AFU units there are only clinging to the western outskirts of the village. As for Prikholotny, it's a sizable, well-fortified settlement, and AFU forces certainly aren't planning to withdraw from it. We'll see how the situation develops from here. I wouldn't be surprised if the Russian army decides to simply bypass it from the west. That option remains entirely on the table. Once that pocket is closed for the AFU, a very interesting period will open up, since a large amount of maneuvering space becomes available. A push could come either toward the western side, near the Pechenihi Reservoir, or toward the eastern side, near Veliki Burluk. Problems are mounting for the AFU in the north, partly as a result of some genius decision back in May to pull an entire brigade out of this sector. Where was it sent, you ask? To Zaporizhzhia region, or rather to Dnipropetrovsk region, to attack near Komar and help contain the Vostok grouping. And, interestingly, that same Zaporizhzhia sector is now developing its own set of problems. So in the end, the AFU tried to improve its position in one area, only for another area, in Kharkiv region, to collapse almost immediately. Russian forces now have decent prospects of taking a large stretch of Kharkiv region. I wouldn't be surprised if the Russian army manages to repeat 2022 and push from the north all the way to Izium, the very axis from which Russian forces once tried to break into Donetsk region and take Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Now let's move to Zaporizhzhia region, and arguably the top story of the day, which certainly made waves yesterday: Russian troops entering Kharkiv, approaching from the south. When I first saw this news, I'll admit I was, let's say, culturally surprised. This was confirmed, notably, by Ukrainian mapper channels. It's not yet clear whether Russian troops have actually gained a foothold inside the settlement itself. I expect we'll find out in the coming days. Until now, Kharkiv was considered nearly impregnable. In reality, its defenses have proven far more susceptible to pressure than assumed. If the Russian army manages to establish even a small bridgehead there, it's quite plausible we'll see the town fall from the south, even though everyone expected it to fall as a result of pressure from the Vostok grouping instead. One more important point worth mentioning: the weeks-long campaign of massed glide bomb strikes on the city likely disorganized the AFU garrison there, and they may simply have been caught off guard by this Russian advance. The map also now shows that this Russian advance has effectively cut off Mala Tokmachka from normal access to the rear. Logistics for the settlement have essentially collapsed. It will be very interesting to watch how the situation develops here, and whether Ukrainian forces manage to withstand this push or whether AFU defenses give way. It's worth noting they're holding fairly significant forces here too, so we'll keep watching to see where this Russian push leads. I still maintain that the real key to Kharkiv lies to the east. Once Russian forces reach and take Omelnik, that's when Kharkiv's fate will truly be sealed. And incidentally, Ukrainians love to criticize Siersky, but he was actually a fairly capable general. He understood that the main threat was the Vostok grouping, which, if you recall, tore through AFU defenses last fall and winter, and was pushing hard toward Zaporizhzhia. At the time, we said that if the pace held, Russian forces would be standing at the eastern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia by November. Syrskyi understood this too, that if nothing were done, that's exactly what would happen. So he pulled together everything he had, and then some, and launched attacks against the Vostok grouping from the north and west, meaning Ukrainian forces went on the offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk direction, and it worked. The Russian grouping's pace slowed considerably. As you'll recall, the Russian grouping had been advancing more than 20 kilometers westward over a couple of months along a broad front, covering roughly 70 kilometers from Kharkiv. In more recent months, Ukrainian forces tried to force battles on Russian troops, seized the initiative, prepared their forces, and pushed about 10 kilometers into Russian-held territory in Dnipropetrovsk region. Worth noting that Russian forces had only lightly consolidated their positions there. Troops were already worn down, manpower was in short supply, and Ukraine took advantage of this, assembling a substantial force for the push. In the first week, they did manage to advance reasonably well, but the pace of the offensive quickly dropped off, and AFU forces ran out of steam just as fast. Now it's a status quo situation here, with Russian forces working to restore their positions and having taken Kalinivsky for the time being. This particular story is on pause for now, but it will continue, and we'll certainly discuss it when it does. Whatever else may be said, Syrskyi did train at a military academy and does have a solid grasp of how to wage war. Zelensky has now put in place someone who never completed a military academy at that level, someone who can also fight at the tactical level, but who falls well short of Syrskyi's standard. Also, from the eastern flank of Zaporizhzhia, footage has emerged showing Russian forces advancing westward from Hulyapilska and Kharkiv. Russian forces advanced roughly 2 kilometers and took up new positions. Now let's move to the Kostiantynivka direction, where objective control footage has come in from Oleksievo-Druzhkivka. Russian forces entered the settlement as I mentioned yesterday, and now objective control footage has appeared confirming it. The video shows Russian infantry already operating inside the settlement in some numbers. I expect we'll get more footage from here soon, as sources with contacts on the ground say Russian forces have already established a firm foothold. Fighting is already underway inside the settlement, with Russian forces continuing to bring in additional infantry and clear each house of remaining resistance. The town itself is medium-sized, with a pre-war population of around 7,000. It has a large number of private houses and quite a few high-rise buildings. The town is split by the Kryvyi River, and so far Russian forces have been focused specifically on the western part, even though most of the town lies on the eastern side. It's quite likely that fighting for the western part won't drag on much longer, while Ukrainian units on the eastern side may end up having to withdraw on their own, since the withdrawal routes will be under the control of Russian FPV drone operators. We'll be watching for further advances in this settlement. Now let's look at what's happening just north of it. From the Kozacha-Lopan area, footage has emerged of strikes on the settlement of Prudyanka, with Russian aviation carrying out massed strikes using glide bombs against AFU positions. Fighting for Kozacha-Lopan itself continues. Summing up the past 24 hours, one settlement and just over 7 square kilometers of territory passed under Russian control. The AFU made no advances over the past day. Well, that's all I have on the frontline situation for today.